Let's start by introducing each of our panelists. So Helen, if you'd like to start, you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. It's really good to meet you all and see you all. I got asked to do this by my mate Martin, and he said, "Oh, it's just a chat with some students, and there's so many of you here, so it's become a bigger thing," which I think's great. It was a bigger thing than I expected. So yeah, I'm Helen. I'm grew up in Scotland. Obviously, you can tell by the accent, but I'm based down. I live in Luton now because it's closer to the bright lights of London, where most of the best theatre in the world is, I reckon. Not to dismiss other theatre, obviously, but this is where I am now. Most of my experience recently has been in large-scale musicals, plays, and touring. Yeah, so that's about it, really. Questions to follow.
Cool, thank you, Helen. That's wonderful. Elaine, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Elaine. So I was born in Hong Kong and I came over to England when I was 17. So I've actually been in this country longer than I have been in Hong Kong, hence the reason I have no accent left whatsoever. I have been in stage management for just over 15 years. Well, I've been a DSM for just over 15 years. I think I've done nearly all the genres and nearly all types of venues. Mainly in musicals and opera. Done many years on the road and now decide that I'm too old for that and therefore no longer tour and would like a life. So I mainly stay in my London home with my rabbit and my hamster. I don't really know what you're going to ask me, but do not expect too clean answer from me. I know that this is a student forum, so I'll try to keep it as clean as possible, but I'm not guaranteeing anything.
Thank you, Helen. Bleeping may be required. Archie, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name's Archie. It's great to be here. I've got terrible imposter syndrome because I'm really new. So I only graduated in 2018, and since then I have somehow managed to fit in opera, ballet, musicals, plays, fringe plays, and had just moved from being an ASM book cover up to being a DSM. And that's kind of where I always wanted to be. So that was exciting. And then, of course, COVID came and took everything away. So I'm just really excited to hopefully chat a bit about that, what I've been up to and how I found that experience. Oh, I'm from Herefordshire as well. And also theatre was my second career. So I've done a few goes on the merry-go-round. Cool.
Cool, thank you. Archie is a fellow BOFTA student, graduate. He is a graduate. And Jane, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. First off, I think it's really important to say that I don't live or work in London. I've only done one London job in the past 8 years of being a DSM. So I went to Hull University, didn't go to drama school, and I work primarily in regional theatre and touring, mostly plays, a couple of musicals and a couple of other things thrown in. I'll leave that as a tasty bit for later. But yeah, mostly do small to mid-scale. I've only done one thing that could have ever been termed as large. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you. I've never worked in London either. That's interesting to see the spread. Okay, brilliant. So our first set of questions about the role of a DSM and starting your career. So we thought we'd ask first, like, how you got to where you are, how you progressed into your chosen career, how you started out. Jane, if you'd like to start.
Okay. How did I start? I started by halfway through my A-level year, cancelling all my applications to go to university to read English and history. I just woke up one morning and went, well, that's a dramatic way of putting it. I realised that drama was the only thing that I was really excited and challenged by, but yet didn't understand really what that meant, because I didn't want to act. I knew that, but I didn't know that stage management was a career. I didn't know there was a whole army of people going there behind the scenes. So I took a year out and basically did all the work experience I could possibly do. I made so many cups of tea, did so much photocopying, and basically hung around any theatre or theatre companies that would take me, and kind of went, yeah, I feel there's a role somewhere in this for me, but this is the world I want to be in. So I went to Hull, not a drama school, but heavily practical in its approach to the course. The Gulbenkian Theatre is a huge barn of a theatre that can be transformed into any space the students want. So I actually got, I think, an extremely practical and wide-ranging experience in terms of putting theatre together there. Then I went on to do about a year and a half of crew work, unpaid work, low paid work, basically turning up places and going, this is me, this is what I can do, please hire me. And eventually Hull Truck did. They gave me my first official equity ASM contract. And then from then on, a couple of ASM contracts, and somebody took a chance on me as a DSM. And from that point, I've either been a DSM or the interestingly termed stage manager on book. So yeah, that's how I got started and how I progressed.
Thank you. I think we're all aware we'll all have to do a lot of work experience and shadowing. Yeah, Archie, would you like to say something?
Yeah, so I, like I said, I had another career. So I first started, I did a degree at Royal Holloway in classics. And all through my time at school and my time at university, I spent most of my time doing shows alongside other things. So I was doing shows in a lecture theatre that used to be a swimming pool and all that jazz, and spent basically most of my time doing that. And then when I graduated, people said to me, what are you going to do? Are you going to go and work in theatre? I was like, you can't make a career in theatre if you're not an actor. And then sort of went on my merry way and went to work in politics, and then moved to London and ended up meeting various people working in the West End, things like that. Started doing some shadowing and thought, actually, God, stage management is where I want to be. This is what I want to do. So I took a bit of a chance back in 2016 and went to Bristol and trained at Bristol for 2 years, which was brilliant course, fully recommend. Came out, and while I was at Bristol, we did mock interviews with the Welsh Opera. And about 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from the Welsh Opera saying, oh, we really like you. Do you want to come work here? So I did that for 2 months. Then that snowballed into a #1 tour of Dr. Dolittle, which sadly didn't run the run, but was a phenomenal experience because I got chucked into a role as a puppet technician as well as an ASM with pretty much no experience. And then from that, ended up doing the ballet, doing fringe stuff, and then spending time at Magic Mike Live as a book cover. And then I saw an advert from Bill Kenwright saying we need DSMs, which I applied for because I thought, why not? And then all of a sudden I get a phone call on a Tuesday morning, I think, saying, do you want to come in to interview? And by Tuesday afternoon, I got offered the job, and that was that. And then I was in rehearsals for a week because it was Joseph, which is a machine of a show. Did a week's rehearsal, and then went into 3 days of tech in a leisure centre in Doncaster, and that was that. And I was happy as Larry until that tour also got cut short. But then Bill was going to keep me on again for another show until coronavirus hit. So it all just, I mean, it's sensationally lucky. Like, it was such a sequence of ridiculous things that happened. Like last year, I ended up doing, UK tours. I went to South Korea with The Wedding Singer, which Elaine, I know, is a show that you also did back in the past. And just, it was nuts. So it was just, yeah, there was no particular method. It just happened. And I'm really grateful that it happened that way, really.
Brilliant. I can also recommend BOFTAs. We might as well segue on to Elaine then, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about your route in.
My route here started like a lot of young girl in an Asian culture, being pushed into doing music and dance and stuff. So I started off as a singer, pianist, and a ballet dancer when I was really little. And I was being chucked onto school's production because obviously, why not, if you've got people that have studied dance or singing. And I remember distinctly when I was about 6 years old doing a school play, a school musical, and I was supposed to be doing a couple of pirouettes downstage center. And I was too busy looking into the wings of that person calling the show, who I don't know is called a DSM at that point, and nearly ending up in the orchestra pit. Obviously, when you're 6 and 7, you can't do spot that well. Come on. So from then onwards, I decide that I will look into what that person is doing, and that becomes my obsession. So after schools, in secondary schools, I was running off to like after school drama workshops and stuff. When everyone wants to do acting, I want to make things happen. I want to make things that people use and everything else. And it was from that mentor of an after school club that I get to experience when touring show came to Hong Kong. For example, Miss Saigon, when it would tour into Hong Kong many years ago. And I was just obsessed with everything backstage. So I decided lie to my parents a little bit about why I'm coming to the United Kingdom to do sixth forms. My parents thought that I was going to Cambridge to do music. Little did they know that I was coming over to do drama school. So I did sixth forms in Oxford and then ended up in drama school, did drama schools in Guildford School of Acting 20 years ago. And then did a work experience at Watford Palace. So I started like Jane in the Rap House as well. And from there, been there a freelance ASM for about a year. And then moved on from there to become their freelance DSM, and very luckily got the break from there and have been a DSM ever since. And a lot of my jobs have been recommended, surprisingly, well, not so surprisingly, but wasn't what I expected, by lighting designers, because apparently being able to speak numbers really fast is what lighting designer really like in DSM. So hence the reason I gone into musicals and opera.
Oh, wow. I think a lot of people start out in drama and then segue backstage. It's not something I did, but that's really interesting. Helen, would you like to tell us a little bit?
Yeah, a bit like what you just said. I started doing amateur theatre when I was a teenager. I didn't do any school shows. There just wasn't a good drama department at my high school. So I joined a local amateur panto company when I was a teenager. All the teenagers did. It was just something that you did just so you could get drunk at the after show party. You know, that was just the way a teenager wanted to just socialize. Anyway, you know, but I decided when I was in my late teens that I enjoyed it so much I wanted to do that forever as a job, as a career, but started to realize, you know, there was a backstage area that was probably more me, because I was very young and very shy when I was young, and, you know, I didn't want to be a performer. You know, I was just a little chorus girl at the back. So yeah, so I did a bit of amateur theatre, then went to Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh, which was amazing, and then did a couple of shows around Edinburgh, which is great for the Edinburgh Festival. There's always stuff going on at the festival, and it's a great place to be. You know, I think everyone should experience it at some point in their life, do, you know, something at the Edinburgh Festival. And then I fell into repertoire theatre at Pitlochry, which is wonderful because it's one of the few places where you do 6 different plays at once on the same stage. You know, you take the show down at the end of the day and you put another one on, or you do 2 different shows on a matinee day. Yeah, and then thank you to the wonderful free list by the SMA, I just by chance went from Pitlochry Theatre in the backwood Little Highlands to a mega musical Miss Saigon, you know, because of the free list, you know. So I do think, as some of you have hinted before, it's networking is everything, you know, and you just got to keep moving on. I think you never settle and never stay somewhere too long, because you've got to just keep moving around. So that's how I've got to where I am now. But I also must credit my mum and my wonderful nana, who never worked in theatre. I'm the first person from my family to work in theatre, but thanks to my mum and my nana, they gave me the bug for musicals, because ever since I was a baby, you know, I was planted in front of the telly and I would watch musicals, and they are part of my blood, they're part of my soul, you know, and that is why I think I went into it and I love it, you know. It was part of my upbringing. Yeah, that's how I've got here now. Many roller coasters along the way, but yeah, here I am in a pandemic, not working. It's all gone well.
Yeah, the pandemic sucks. But yeah, we'll all get back there. But yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, the different ways that everybody gets in, and the element of luck and combined with working hard. Thank you, guys. So our next question is, as a DSM, what genre do you prefer working in and why? Shall we start with Elaine?
Did you just saw my completely baffled look and decide to start with me, Kat? Thanks for that one.
Oh, sorry, we can start somewhere else if you want.
No, you're fine. I did say that I would just, be a rabbit in a headlight sometime and just do it. I think my favorite genre to core would be musical. I think my favorite genre to rehearse is Shakespeare. The reason I love calling musicals is because it's fast. It gets my adrenaline going. Majority of the time that people use me are for shows that are slightly crazy to core. So I like the challenge of maintaining that show in, show out to do that. I love rehearsing Shakespeare because it doesn't matter how many times you've done it as you like it, the cuts will be different and the idea will be different. The way that the creative team and the actors being able to explore the play. I think Shakespeare is just such a clever clever man that his language just transfer into so many different ways in different settings. So I found that really fascinating. And for someone that English is not my first language, being able to understand the story in rehearsal room, it's really important for me to then go on and do a good job on the show, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's a really giraffe long-winded conversation that I just had there.
I'd love to be able to call a musical one day, and I love Shakespeare as well. So I feel you there. Jane, would you like to comment on that?
Okay, I'm going to follow Elaine's example and give a two-part answer because that then means I don't have to fully decide. So cop out, but thanks, Elaine. My favourite show to rehearse is two-handers. I really like them. I've done quite a lot of them, partly through doing regional theatre because, studio shows, two actors is always a good idea. And the show I was doing before lockdown hit was Jim Cartwright's 2. I just find them such an interesting process to watch develop. Because at the end of the day, there are two actors on stage. Nobody is coming to help them out. One actor finishes speaking and the other person absolutely knows it's them. Did Educating Rita, and the guy playing Frank said, "I'm so sorry, but when Lauren stops speaking, I'm like, it's got to be me. But while she's speaking, all I'm hearing is white noise, white noise, white noise. Oh God, it's me." And just watching that relationship develop between two actors as they build this piece with just them. And there's no reprieve coming. There's no third person about to walk on and go, aha, I'm going to now give you a break whilst I deliver this wonderful monologue. It's really impressive. And seeing that professional, personal relationship develop and this thing being built, I really enjoy it. My favourite show to be in tech with and to call is youth theatre shows. I really like doing them. Partly because the goal is slightly different with youth theatre shows. The goal is to do the best that you can do, obviously, but actually it's all about making sure that those kids have the most amazing time and that they're given this support and structure where they can just go out on stage and do the best that they can do and have an amazingly fun time that is going to be a special memory for them. And I like to think that I have got the experience and the skills to be able to do that. So yeah, just seeing it all come together and the experience they have and that applause they get from their family at the end of the curtain calls is, yeah, I get very, very happy to be privileged to be in the job that I'm in when I do youth theatre shows.
Wow, that's something that I'd like to do as well, as I'm sure a lot of people in the room will.
Don't
Helen?
get me wrong, teenagers are an absolute nightmare, but hey, you're not in charge of shouting at them.
Cool. Helen?
For me, my favourite genre is musicals. It's a dream when I work on them, I think, because when I was little, I was so obsessed with them. I remember walking past the Edinburgh Playhouse every day when I went to college in Edinburgh, walking past it thinking, oh, wouldn't it be amazing to work on a musical in somewhere like that? I never thought it would happen because I was doing small scale theatre in Scotland and things like that, and so certainly musicals is my top thing that I like to do. And a bit like Elaine said, it's the pace which gets my adrenaline running. But I think on musicals, they are a lot more high tech and therefore very challenging. The pressure is greater. Sometimes they are in large venues, so there is a lot going on, which is more of a challenge. And I like a challenge. You often find there's a bigger team on a musical. That's fun. And I just, it's just upbeat. It just, whether it's a sad song or a happy song, or I just love working on them. And I think I love hearing the audience respond as well. There's just nothing like it when you hear an audience cheer or roar or gasp. So yeah, without a doubt, for me, it's musicals.
I used to dress on some big musicals, and even that was thrilling, so I can understand that. Archie?
Sorry, my laptop just made a noise. Sorry. Yeah, so just to hark back to what Helen said about remembering musicals as a kid, like when I first was thinking about leaving my job and going to drama school, I was thinking back, and the big memories that I always remembered was going to see shows. It was going to see The Lion King in London. Like, I remember going for dinner before seeing The Lion King, and then just these animals walking down the aisles, and so that was such a vivid memory for me. Like going to see Panto, going to see Wallace and Gromit live at the Cheltenham Everyman. I must have been like 7, but that's what I remember. So when I went to drama school, I knew that I wanted to work on musicals, and Bristol will tell you that you don't have to work on musicals to enjoy theatre. And I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. But then I left and I got this job with the Welsh Opera. And I'd seen 2 operas before in my life at that point. And I was chucked in this rehearsal room on a colossal show. It was War and Peace at the Welsh Opera, which was massive. And given a score, because I was a wing ASM, so I was queuing people onto stage with this score. And me having been at my interview saying, yeah, I could score read. Of course, that's fine. Be given a Prokofiev score with most of its handwritten. It's a terrible photocopy. And literally, like, just stood in this rehearsal room with not a clue what to do. But it was that chaos and not chaos, but that excitement and that pace of work that's always going when you're doing a really, really big show. So, rehearsing that, getting that on stage, embarrassing myself, rehearsing Dr. Doodle, getting that on stage, and then going into Magic Mike. And my first week, or my first day, basically being told, we're short-staffed, we need you on the book this week. Like, we need you to know the book this week. So I was like, ugh, okay, fine. And that's not a busy show to call, but it's a complex show. There's a ton of automation, there's a ton of time code, there's a ton of everything. And then on the first time I called it by myself, the sound system failed. And the show is like being in a nightclub. So we had no way of telling the audience that we were broken. So we had to send the stage manager on and do all that. So that adrenaline is what really gets me going. And then I'll never forget the first time we did the opening night of Joseph, which was my first show as DSM, and just taking my cans off at the end and just breathing. Now, Joseph isn't even like a huge show to call, but it's a busy show. It's not like 400 or something like that. But like just having that moment, just like, oh my God, like that just happened. I did that. And that's what does it for me. And that's, even now, I'll listen to a cast recording while I'm working or something, and I just get that fizz that I'm sure everyone else is familiar with. And that's what does it for me. I love a play. Don't get me wrong, I love a play, but it's just that there's something about a live band and, like I said, chaos and just everything happening so smoothly, just really, like it's like a drug. So I talk to friends and who are doing other stuff as well at the moment. And it's like, yeah, it's that drug that's missing. And that's what's always been the big thing for me that meant I would upheave my entire life 4 years ago. And that's why I felt so privileged to have been in this position I was when COVID hit. Obviously not right after, that was pretty rubbish, but yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're all in it for the adrenaline and the buzz, for sure. Cool. So our last question in this section is, how you really, I think Archie's explained this a little bit, how you really went from ASM to DSM and what that experience was like. And in relation to that, have you got any tips for taking over from another DSM should that happen? So I guess if we start with Archie, yeah.
I haven't got time to mute and unmute. Yeah, so I said, I went from being an ASM book cover to being a DSM with very little notice. I left with 2.5 weeks notice, which you shouldn't really do it. People get annoyed with you. But I don't know. I mean, the one tip that I had when I took over as DSM on Joseph is that I spent a lot of the rehearsal week remaking the book to exactly how I wanted it, because everyone has their own style. And even if you've never done it before, you kind of need to work out what that style is. So I got this book and I spent so much time poring over my laptop, remaking the whole thing. And that just meant that when we got into tech, I had something that I was familiar with. I knew every single page, I knew every single post-it note, and that was just mine. In terms of the step up, half of it was luck. I mean, I was in the right place at the right time. They needed people. I was semi-available. But just being, I wouldn't have been prepared for that step up if I'd not. I was a bit, when I interviewed for Magic Mike, they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a DSM. So I spent a lot of my time at Magic Mike and shows before that. Like when I did The Wedding Singer at South Korea, it was a 2-week run, but I still spent 3 days learning the book and calling it with the video with the DSM, because she's there. She can help out and tell me where I'm going wrong. So it's using every single opportunity I had to build those skills, even if it wasn't on a live show. Even when you're doing a tiny fringe show as the stage manager on the book, it's just getting all those skills and working out what works for you, because one person's book might not work for you. But actually, when you're looking at something that you've created yourself, it's in your head and it's there, and it's so much more accessible because of that. And just be ready to ask questions. Like in the tech week for my first DSM gig, after every session I was going to the lighting designer, the sound designer, just be like, okay, what did I do wrong? What do you need different? How can I do that better? And just not being afraid to be sort of vulnerable in that way, and not being afraid to say, I just don't know, or I feel like I've done, is that what you wanted? And just constantly keeping that communication going with everyone, the cast, designers, everyone, and just being as close as you can to sort of the center of everything, so that you're fully confident that what you're doing is exactly what people want, if that makes sense and isn't too obvious a point.
No, that's amazing. I'm ASM book cover at the moment, so that's definitely a tip I will be taking on board. Helen?
So one of my first jobs at Pitlochry Festival Theatre, they have a different structure there. So, well, when I was there about 20 years ago, they had a team of probably about six stage management, and even ASMs would be on the book for one of their 6 shows for that season. So I think starting there as an ASM on the book for a show, whilst being ASM on their other shows, is a very good way to learn to be a DSM, but not have that title and not have that massive responsibility and pressure of being the DSM on the bigger show. So, you know, by the nature, I was a DSM, but I was ASM on book. It's a title that you think, well, what does that mean? It's the same thing. It's, you know, you're still on the book, you have the responsibilities as a DSM, but you could say it's a bit like saying junior DSM. And I think that was an excellent foundation, you know, and I think more theatres should do it, actually. I think it gives ASMs, you know, that good core skill and training for the role. Moving on as being an ASM book cover on the big musicals, being a book cover, I found so nerving, because you're the book cover, you're not the DSM, so you can't do it your way. You have to do it the way you're taught, or you have to do it the way the DSM does, just out of respect. So, but when you're a DSM, you can do anything your way, because you're a DSM. It's your show, it's your book. But learning from some great DSMs I've worked with. I mean, I've worked with some wonderful DSMs. Just listening and learning is how you learn to make that progression from ASM to DSM. Learning what's the good thing to do, learning sometimes what's not the good thing to do. So, but I think most of all, people skills are the best thing a DSM should have. So, you know, I listened and learned and took mental tips of how people did things and how they reacted to things, how they learnt with people. So that's how, that's how I think is the best way to make that progression, is to be a book cover or to be an ASM on book. You know, don't dive straight in. We can all say we've been a DSM, but what type of show was it? Was it a show of 2 people in a studio, or was it, you know, something at the Royal Opera House, you know? And the first couple of shows I did when I was 21 years old, I could say I was a DSM. It's nothing compared to what I still had to learn years and years later. So I think it's important to, you know, and I think we all know this anyway, it's a very varied, theatre's massively varied. So it's a varied role. You know, you could say you're DSM on one thing, doesn't mean you're capable or experienced to do it on the next show. But yeah, as an ASM, listen, learn, just get involved, and, you know, don't be afraid to make those mistakes though, because you will, you know. So there you go, that's my tip.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, that's listen and learn is definitely an amazing tip. Yeah. Jane?
I mean, so far, I think Archie and Helen have put a lot of what I would have said far more eloquently than I would have done. How I got my first job as a DSM was a little bit unusual. I interviewed for it, but it was a week before rehearsals were due to start, so they were desperate, to put not too fine a point on it. And I actually got hired because they had just had through their studio a show that I'd worked on at the Edinburgh Fringe, and it was an incredibly proppy show. With that, obviously at the Edinburgh Fringe, we had a 10-minute turnaround to get this show out and the next show in. So we spoke about that in my interview, and I learned years later, because I continued to work at the theatre, that they'd hired me mostly on the strength of clearly the fact that I was unflappable, and that clearly I could handle this complex setup and changeover. And they went, if she can handle that, we can absolutely just shove her in the studio where she's the lighting op, the sound op, and has to set the props herself and do all the switch on. If she can handle that show, she can handle DSM in our studio. So it wasn't actually any of the obvious DSM skills that got me that job. So you never know what will make an impression on somebody. I'll just say that. You never know what CSMs, producers, production managers will pick up, because even though they look like the busiest people on earth running around doing their job and supervising everybody else, they are absolutely picking up more than you think. Trust me, they've got eyes in the back of their head. The other thing I'd say is recognize that everybody processes information in different ways. I'm somebody who likes writing stuff down. I like writing stuff down. I can read very quickly, and I can take what I read and articulate it quite smoothly. That's just the way I process information. I like to write it down. I like to give wordy notes. However, that doesn't work for everybody. Some people are more numbers based. Some people have trouble taking in lots of wordy information. And I find that actually working as a DSM, sometimes the easiest thing you can do is sit down with an ASM and say, how do you want the paperwork? Do you want pictures? Do you want words? Do you want me to print it on green paper, because that makes it easier for you to read? Talk to the lighting designer and just say, are we going to be pure numbers, or do you want something else? Yeah, once I sort of figured that out and worked that into my approach, I found that communication and anticipating and understanding problems are just that little bit easier.
Well, that's a really good tip about paperwork. I'll take that on board. Thank you. And Elaine?
I didn't move up the rank like everyone else. I feel like so bad that I didn't. And actually, that's a really bad way to do it. I can say that from experience. I moved up the rank way too quickly, and I kind of got stuck on the rank a little bit. So like I said, that I did work experience in a rep theatre, and because working in that rep theatre, when they were short of DSM, they put me as the DSM. I didn't do any ASM book covering. I really, really wish I did, because like going down the line, being the DSM, then having to teach book when you haven't been an ASM book cover, it was the scariest thing I have ever had to do. Scarier than calling arena show, I can tell you that one, because you impact on how the next person is going to call that show. And I really wish that I did it slower and did few more jobs as an ASM before I moved up to DSM. So my one little tip to you is, if you're doing a lot of ASM job, don't think it's because you're not good enough to be a DSM. Use those time to really craft as an ASM, because the amount that it will help you when you're a DSM, writing rehearsal notes, knowing that how you need to write it for your ASM, knowing how to work in the team with the stage manager. Those are the things that I had to learn it the harder way because I moved up too quick, you know, especially when I then go into the big scale musical, to then be in a position that I have a bigger team and have to work with different stage managers and ASMs. That's when I struggled when I first started doing that. So don't think because your mates have gone up to DSM, you should be. Do it at your pace. So if you currently think that you are a DSM in college, like I did when I did, don't think that you need to push yourself to go straight into try to get a DSM job, 3 jobs in. Like, just grab every opportunity you got, that just do your ASM jobs when you can do them. Because like Archie, like Helen said, that, you know, if you can learn from watching another DSM, because in college you're being taught how to do it, you don't get to see it. That's the difference. The only thing that you get in college is seeing your fellow student be a DSM, but they're not the pros. Yeah, seeing a pro do a DSM work is so different, and I really wish I learned it earlier. That's my little regret of how I jumped to DSM really quickly. And I can't even remember the second question. Seeing as a DSM, I would say, like Helen said, people skills is the most important thing. You can't teach someone common sense. You can't teach someone how to read people. But the more you are in an environment like that, you learn those things. And reading a creative team is one of the biggest skills you can have as a DSM, because you are the director's right-hand person. The amount of time that I am diffusing situation because the director is getting their head in a cloud going, I need that to look like that, I need that to look like that. As a DSM, you are the one that being able to fuse that bomb, you know, to be able to facilitate that with the other department. That's when you became really inaccessible, you know, being able to be that person to translate that language. So you need to be friends with everyone, in the sense that you can talk to everyone openly. Like, the amount of time I talk to the director and goes, you know, what is in my head is that idea is ridiculous, but I don't go up to them and say your idea is ridiculous. You know, knowing how to approach your director, choreographer, and other creatives, and then to translate it into a technical language for the rest of your team or the other technical department, is what will make you a great DSM in a big show.
Fantastic tip, thank you. Yeah, we all know the importance of interpersonal skills. Well, that's our first set of questions. I'm now going to hand over to Nathalie for any questions from the floor, and the second set.
None so far, none here. So we'll just move on to the next set of questions then, which are actually fitting quite well what Elaine was saying about people skills and stuff, because it's about the rehearsal room and rehearsals. So my first question was going to be, what are your top tips for managing the rehearsal room and working with other people and communicating in the rehearsal room? Shall we start with, let's start with Helen.
Okay, so my tips for managing rehearsal room, I don't think there's one set rule. I think, as Elaine's kind of hinted on, you have to use your mental skills to gauge how everyone is. You know, a director might be really kind of cool with you taking over, or you might have to take a little bit of a back seat and let them not run the room, but they have a structure of what they're trying to do, and you have to kind of have a good balance. When you are in a rehearsal room by yourself, when I say by yourself, you've not got the rest of your team with you supporting you, or not yet. You know, I think managing rehearsal room, is really bloody hard, because you're doing maybe 5 people's jobs at once. You're trying to block, you're trying to prompt, you might be operating sound, you have got people coming and going, you've got actors coming up to you, talking to you about XYZ everything, and you're trying to observe what's going on in the room. So I've learned to make my job easier as I get into work so much earlier than I need to be there, because I just need that peace of mind to work out what we're doing. Tidy up the room. Rehearsal rooms are always a mess, no matter how much you try and keep on top of it. It's really hard to keep a rehearsal room in order, I think, especially when you've got limited space. But I have learned to, the actors, most of them try to help. You know, they know that there's only one of you and you're trying to set props while you're doing 6 other roles. So I've learned to put clear and formal, polite signage around rooms saying, you know, use the bin, please, or please be aware this door slams. You know, things like this really annoy people in the room, and you, like a slamming door does my head in, you know, and it will make a director similarly boil inside probably. So I've learned to just put signs in places, little things like that, housekeeping help, to keep a rehearsal room in order, like you don't put your bags there, or, you know, it just sets the tone for everyone to do their bit to help out. And, you know, especially when you do get a break in a rehearsal room, you might not get a break yourself, because by the time the rehearsal has stopped, everyone's stopped for 15 minutes for a tea or coffee break. You have to go and find the rest of your team, you know, and say, right, we need this, we need that, you know, so you might not get a break. So I try to, again, like I said, get in early, manage your own time as best as you can, because if you don't get a break, then you can't do your job properly. So you have to kind of, you know, eat when you can, drink when you can. It's not fair that you don't get a break. We all know that, but that is part of the job. You know, you have, it makes your job easier if you're catching up with your team and, you know, all these other things. That's why sometimes I will choose to forfeit a bit of my break to just get on with what needs done. My piece.
Thanks, Helen. Thank you very much. Jane, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I was just about to say, can I just say what Helen said? The other thing I would just add is that, particularly in a rehearsal room where it is just you, the actors and the director, you can sometimes forget that that's quite an intimidating space for people who aren't in that immediate team to walk into, particularly visiting creatives like lighting designers, set designers, fight choreographers, because it's your space. Like, you've spent all this time in there as a team, you've got stuff up on the walls, everyone has the place where they sit, you've got the important signage about the bins. So I think always remember that that's quite a intimidating situation for those people to walk into, even though they've been on board from the beginning, they know the director. So just, if you can and it's appropriate, I would really recommend keeping everyone up to date with just what they're going to be walking into on the day they visit, that maybe in the afternoon you're going to be working on a particular scene that is being a bit tricky, so you recommend that they're there right from the start of the session. They don't join at tea break, so they have a chance to feel out the vibe of the room along with everybody else. Or actually you can just say, you know what, that scene's really tough, it's got some difficult subject matter, don't come Wednesday afternoon, we're just not there, we're working through some stuff and we just feel that perhaps Wednesday morning would be the right time because we're doing this section. So yeah, just remember, sometimes people need a little extra welcome to step in over the threshold of your lovely, safe, creative space.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, that's really good advice as well. Archie, have you got anything to add to that in your experience as DSM?
Not a huge amount, because my experience as a DSM in a rehearsal room is very, very limited. One thing I will say is don't wear loud shoes, because the second that you have to walk during a quiet scene, you'll be wearing loud shoes. That'll be very awkward. Signage, huge fan of signage. For every show I've ever done, I've had a folder called passive aggressive signs, as an ASM, as a DSM, whatever, because they are vital. And even little things like, if the back of the stage is the back wall where the door is, having a sign on that door just saying be aware when you walk in, little things like that, which, like Jane said, making the space accessible to people who aren't there all the time. And just to come at from an ASM point of view, especially on a bigger show, is really own your space as an ASM in a rehearsal room. because that will make the rest of the team's life so much easier if they know that your wing is yours. So when I started on Doolittle, Katie, the other ASM, had been looking after the whole room by herself for 2 weeks. And I arrived, she said, here's your running list. There you go. That's your side of the room. And I made it my own. And knowing that everyone knows where their stuff is, what they're doing, is just so important. And it meant that we greased together as a team so quickly, because that relationship just worked. And that's been the same on every single show I've done. And also, just quickly talking about things like re-rehearsals. So if you've got new cast joining, for example, it again comes back to making that room welcoming, making that space accessible, explaining to people where things are, and just creating that environment so that everyone feels welcome when they join a production. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Archie. Yeah, that's really great as well, what you mentioned about being an ASM in the room as well. I saw lots of people find that advice very useful. I hope Elaine doesn't hate me, but I will, as I'm seeing lots of questions coming in, I might move on to the next question, because you already started talking a lot about people skills. But I'll actually throw this next question to you to start off with. In your experience, how do you gauge how much artistical and logistical input you have with the director, and sort of your working relationship with them as a DSM?
Really, really good question. And I think it is one hard to judge if you haven't worked with the director before. For me, working with a new director, always the first couple of days is a test the water thing. See how they are with the cast, because that tells you a lot of their style. Do the research on the director beforehand as well, because you can see a lot from their press interview of the type of person that they might be. I'm going to pick one director that I work with a lot as an example, Nikolai Foster, who's the artistic director for Curve. He is a very open director and welcome all the kind of suggestion. Not all the directors are like that, but you can tell that from his interviews with press, from program notes that he's done, the kind of person he is. You can tell that from the way that he interacts with actors. Listen to your director's opening welcome speech to your cast, because if they say it that they are welcoming thing, they're not going to just limit it to your cast. But also know your place, because you are there as a DSM. You're not part of the people that have that ownership on stage in the same way as an actor. So know your place, don't overstep it. But that comes from experience, I think. But in terms of like knowing how much to do, it's to gauge it from your director. In opera, just don't. To start off with, just don't. Because the hierarchy in opera, you have already got the maestro who's going to dictate how the music needs to go. The singers have a very, very strong idea, because they would have sang that rap more times than you have ever listened to the CD. So they are the ones and the director to decide. You keep your mouth shut and do your work in an opera rehearsal room.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Yeah, that's really useful, especially regarding opera. It's good to know where we stand in different genres as well, and different types of theatre. I'm going to throw the question to Jane next.
Yeah, I would agree with Elaine. It's really difficult. There are no shortcuts. Every director is different. Every rehearsal room is different. And often you just have to accept that the first time you work with a director with the best will in the world and the best intentions, they don't know you. They're not necessarily going to trust you. So it's a relationship that you have to build up. For example, I've worked with Mark Babbage at Whole Truck an awful lot now. I've lost count of how many shows we've done together. So Mark knows that he can turn to me and go, Jane, this scene change, you know what props need to go where, you know where people need to exit. Can you just do it? And I'll then take a look and I'm like, oh, sure. Yeah, fine. But he knows that I know his style, that I've been there, I've been listening. I know what he's aiming for. And also he knows I'm not going to take it personally if I and the cast work together, build something, he takes one look at it and goes, no. But again, that's experience. That's me noticing what kind of director Mark is, as Elaine said, reading their press interviews and what they say, and listening to what they say on that first day is really key, because quite often they spell out then how they're going to approach the process. And yeah, sometimes you just got to accept that sometimes you are just there to write things down and press the button for the sound. and that's cool. That's just what it is.
Fair enough. Thank you, Jane. Yeah, really interesting that there's so much. Yeah, obviously it's very varied, so you just kind of have to learn and go with the flow. But really interesting what you've both been saying about listening to their opening speech and stuff. I'd never heard that before. So yeah, that's a great tip. Archie, do you have anything to add to that?
Not a huge amount. I mean, I'll back up what Elaine said about operas. Because obviously that being my first experience, it is very much you stand there with your book, put things in where you're told, and that was alarming actually at first, but you kind of get used to it. And I worked with David Pountney, who's the former director of the Welsh Opera, and at one point he. Because this score was so complicated, I'd spent the first 2 weeks queuing everyone on slightly late because I wasn't quite sure of the point. So I just thought, okay, definitely that's where it's going to be. And then at one point, I sent someone on slightly early during a big full company run, full chorus, 60 in the chorus, 15 principals, all the creatives in the room. And we stopped a little bit later, and David looked over and said, "Oh, what happened with XYZ's entrance?" So I popped out from my little wing and just said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I sent her on a bit early." And he just lowered his glasses and just said in front of everyone, "Well, that makes a change, doesn't it?" But we'd had that I've been asking questions for the last 2 weeks and doing things like that. So you'd sort of built that relationship that was okay. I was mortified, but I wasn't, it wasn't this horrendous experience. So it's just feeling things out and just working out where you stand. That is it. As Elaine said, it's knowing your place and knowing exactly where you sit in that whole process. And once you've worked that out, then things will just happen.
Brilliant, Archie, thank you. And I think it's really great for everyone to be reassured that it's okay to make mistakes and that won't ruin your relationship with your director or anyone else. Helen, do you have anything you would like to add to that?
I'd be repeating what everyone else said, really. The only thing I would add is that I think it's really worthwhile maybe having a chat with the director before rehearsals start, if you can. Drop a little email, introduce yourself, say hello, and offer to have a chat on the phone. One, it really helps break the ice, and two, it shows that you're being assertive enough to just want to get to know them a little bit or have a chat. And it can, at that point, you can ask. They might already say, "So this is how we're doing it, and this is what I want you to do, and I want you to help me." You can get an idea of what the person's like, which will help you do your job better. But I totally recommend getting in touch with director and maybe some other creators before a rehearsal starts, because as a DSM in the rehearsal room, you are key. So don't just wait till day one and for the meet and greet and go, "Oh, who are you?" Because for example, there was one show I did where a director turned up. He looked like a tramp. You would not have thought he was the director. He walked in and I thought, "Who's this guy?" And if I had known, a bit like what Elaine said, do your research on directors. Maybe there'll be photographs or interviews of them on the internet. It sounds a little bit stalky, but if you do your background research on who you're going to be working with, it helps you be prepared for when you meet them. So yeah, I recommend dropping a little line to get in touch personally, and also stalking people.
Thanks, Helen. That's a great tip. So final question of this section was to ask about bookkeeping. So what are your sort of best tips for keeping the book tidy in terms of blocking and cues, especially if there's been some like challenging blocking you've had to put down, and how did you approach that? So maybe I'll start with Helen again.
So blocking and bookkeeping, it just doesn't really I've never found blocking to get easy. I found blocking is just like you have to just write things down and it will just change and change and change and change, especially on a busy show. What I have learned on bigger shows is that there might be a dance captain that does a lot of blocking. And that will take a bit of the pressure off you as a DSM, because they are taking, you'll be blocking who's coming on from where, basic stuff, but they will be taking the finer blocking down, which is great because it takes a bit of pressure off you and you can focus on other stuff and then catch up on that later. But yeah, blocking and bookkeeping, I just think that's part of the job. It will change and change and change, and and you might have to catch up on it later. As a fly around me. Yeah, I don't really have much to add on. It's something that will just constantly be a cycle of using a rubber.
Fair enough. Everyone has a different, we'll have different opinions and the one thing that we don't like. So yeah. How about Jane? Do you have a better relationship with blocking, perhaps?
No, write it, be prepared to rub it out, write it again. That's what it is, that's the reality. I would say something about writing down fight blocking. Working in regional theatre, fight choreographer comes in, blocks the fight, and then is there for tech, first couple of performances, but then stage management run the fight calls. And as the DSM, you are usually the person with eyes on, and it's your job to notice if something's wrong and give notes. I find writing down fight notation really quite intimidating, because if I get it wrong and I misremember it, then that's potential for confusion between me and the cast. And I've done some really quite complex fight blocking where there was comprehensive potential for really, if everything went wrong and people mistime stuff, to unfortunately get hurt. So therefore fight calls were really, really important. Talk to the fight director. Just be there for when they work with the cast, pay close attention, and at the end of the session, come up to them and go, look, I'm going to be running fight calls from now on. Is there any chance that I can write up my notation and show it to you? And you can tell me that this bit's really important. Call this bit, that bit, use this terminology, because that's what the cast understand. If there's any aspect, same with blocking down choreography, if you need to talk to the dance captain or the choreographer and just say, look, this bit, how do I write this that best communicates what we're aiming for?
Awesome, thank you so much. That's such interesting and such really good advice about asking around and stuff. And yeah, maybe we'll put the fight choreography question up to hashtag Ask the Team on Friends of the SMA. Maybe we'll get some interesting answers from that as well. Elaine, would you like to follow on? You can, I mean, you don't have to talk just about blocking, it can be about like keeping cues tidy as well.
No, I would happily talk about blocking. I am rubbish at blocking. I have never been good at it because I'm very dyslexic. And I find that as technology has improved, why don't we use them? I film absolutely everything. And the amount of time that, because on the bigger scale shows, you often have 3 rehearsal rooms running, 2 rehearsal rooms running. You can't be everywhere as a DSM. And half the time your team is out doing things, so you can't rely on them to film it either. So rely on them to note it either. So I film absolutely everything. And the best friend that I have made since in big scale musical, it's creating YouTube unlist links. So you share it with your cast, but no one else have it. So it's like a private Google Drive or a Dropbox, but the only difference is that you have no limit because of that. So get your dance captain, get your fight director, get your rest of your stage management team, get yourself on those links as the administrator, and you just keep chucking footage on it and get all the cast that link, get all the creative that link so that they can watch it whenever they want. And for the love of God, please keep deleting the things that have been changed, because or else people are just going to watch the wrong thing, come in with the wrong thing, and that's worse than having a wrong blocking sheet. But YouTube unlist link is the best tip I can give anyone. The amount of time that I have like 60 in the class, 70 in the class, you're never going to write them all down. You can draw shape. Like draw shape is the best, you know, I can do circle, I can do triangle, but you know, when everyone is doing different things, like Helen is saying that you are looking at the entrance and exit, you're not going to know their step. You're not going to be a grade 8 ballet dancer every DSM going. So use your energy somewhere else. Just put the GoPro on in the corner of the room, just record everything. Yes, you will take time after the rehearsal day to look through it, to sort through it, to know which footage you use. But that's much easier than writing everything down and rubbing it off. Like, save the planet, guys.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Excellent advice. I wonder, Archie, do you also use, having done big musicals like Joseph, do you also use videos a lot?
So the shows I've been on, we've used videos a lot. I mean, that's been sort of the core of it, especially when you've got creative site in the room. They're in other places, so people spend their entire lives uploading videos, but it's so important. The one thing I'll pick up on, which is something that Elaine mentioned in the chat as well, is learning the words. And this goes with what Jane was saying about fights. Learn the words that people are using to talk about different bits of the show. So especially for opera and ballet, but just for anything, really make yourself comfortable with the terminology that people are using. So the first time I worked in ballet, they were talking about, I can't even, even simple things. I'd never been a fan of ballet. I'd never seen a ballet. And then someone said, oh yeah, after the pas de deux, this will happen. And I'm there like, well, I feel like I should know what that means, but I don't. So it's just learn to speak the language of the people that you're working with, and your whole life will be much better, and have a load of rubbers and a load of pencils. That's it. That's what I've got to add.
Yeah, honestly, great. Top tips. There you go. Short and simple. Thanks so much. And great insight into the world of opera as well. I'm going to pass on quickly to Kat, and because I think we've had a few questions come through. So would you like to give us the first one, Kat?
Yep, we've had a few questions from the floor. The first couple were quite similar to each other. In that people are asking, has anyone done a master's course? I think we've established that you didn't really, but what would you sort of advise doing a master's course, working in the industry, trying to push your way in that way? And any tips on any skill-based courses that you may have done? Anything online recently?
Maybe start with Archie, since he came from another industry into theatre.
So I don't know. So I obviously did the foundation arts course at Bristol, which is the shorter version of the BA. But from that, I spent most of my time in Bristol in the Hippodrome shadowing DSMs and shadowing ASMs and just seeing what they did and making notes and just learning by watching. And like I said earlier, when I was on other shows, I was always sort of had an eye and spent as much time as I could just absorbing all that information. In terms of coming from another industry, I think what's actually been really instructive is because in March, I was very lucky that when I lost work, I managed to go back. But I've been amazed by how much of what I did and what I've been doing in stage management has transferred back across in terms of people skills. To be honest, just in terms of confidence in being able to make mistakes and just, asking those questions and things like that, that's been really valuable. Probably doesn't really answer the question, but it just comes with time. I mean, I'm a completely different person to the one I was when I graduated and the one I was when I started drama school, and that's 4 years. So it's time, it's experience. It's just being that sponge ready to absorb as much as you can from the environment you're in, because as soon as you're working on a show, you've got a DSM in the room with you, you've got a stage manager, you've got a CSM, you've got a country manager, wherever, and you can learn, and that's where you get sort of the really valuable. I'm glad that Alex, who's the tutor at Bristol, isn't here, but that's where you get the really, really valuable learning experience. That's just seeing, as Elaine said, seeing how the pros do it, and that's pretty much the best experience you can have. Also, the SMAQ interviews, of course, is very good, but just learn, just use your environment and learn from that.
Cool. Alex has sent apologies, Archie.
He also texts me, I know. Jane, have you got anything to add to that? Any skills-based courses you may have done during your career?
I've done quite a few courses during lockdown because I missed the world, and I wanted to get in a virtual room with people and be like, yes, talk to me about theatre. If RC Annie run any more of their online workshops, I really recommend doing them. They do cost. SMA members usually get a discount, and I think there's other ways you can bring the price down. They're really useful because, as I said, in regional theatre, I end up needing to know far more about the nitty-gritty of fight and intimacy, choreography and direction. And those guys, I mean, if you've ever met either of them, they're just so lovely and have so much experience. Their stories alone are worth it. And also all of us really need to get to grips with and understand exactly what we're dealing with theatrical handguns, because trust me, almost everything we're doing is illegal, and we just need to learn how to mitigate our likelihood of getting arrested. So I really recommend RC Annie courses.
I've seen a few of those. I'm definitely gonna look them up. I'm just going to move on slightly to the second question from the floor for Elaine and Helen, but feel free to comment on the first one. We've had like a similar question on recommendations for coming into the industry without a drama school or uni background, and is it obvious to you in the industry who has studied at drama school and who hasn't? Helen, if you'd like to.
I'd say no, it's not obvious. It helps having a drama school background, but some of the best people I've worked with just fell into theatre. And part of me when I was young used to be envious of that. I'd think, that's not fair, they've not got the training. I went to drama school. And I'd think, no, it's those people had the gift of the gab, had common sense, they were good at what they do, and now they're some of the biggest managers, stage managers in the biz, you know. So I think, as so many of us have touched on this again and again, people skills is everything. Networking is everything. So yes, drama school is a wonderful foundation, and you learn how to do it in your drama school environment, but you will learn properly when you get out into the real world and do it, which is what I learned. You know, I didn't walk out of drama school going, hey, I'm a professional. No, I was a dresser for several months before I even did stage management, you know, and but that was great because I was working on the big shows and observing them from the wings, but I was like changing people's sweaty knickers and doing stuff that was really gross, but you know, I was just thrilled to be there, you know. So, you know, I really hate to say it, because I think, you know, drama schools are great and important, but it's right place, right time more than anything else, I see.
Yeah, I would definitely have preferred to have learnt on the job, but sometimes you just have to do the drama school course. But kudos to those who get through without it. Elaine, have you got anything to add to that?
I don't think I notice it a lot, because on most of my shows, people have been around for quite a long time. So even those that haven't done drama school courses would have been in the industry for quite some times. So they would have learned their ropes in their way to go up. I think the most important thing, if you don't come from a drama school background, it's being willing to just do work experience. You need, like, more important than people that have done drama school, unfortunately, because when you have done drama school, you've got like the few contact that you can start off with, whereas if you didn't do that drama school path, you will need to do a lot more work experience to gain that insight, even just learning the terminology that we use in theatre, so that you can ask questions, because you know, first day, if you have never been in this world, you're not going to know how to ask questions as it is. So be prepared to do some work experience. Doesn't mean that it has to be for free labor. That's not what I'm saying about, you know, work experience is not free labor. You get to learn things, and you know, for my work experience, I got to learn all sorts, and like even into the producing world as well. It depends on where you go. I would recommend people that haven't done drama school courses to go into Rep House to do your work experience. Don't apply to SN to do your work experience. A, you stand no chance, sorry to say that, and B, you won't learn anything in the West End that is useful for your career path going up. Go to Rep, apply to the Rep, because then you learn the process, how to do it. And just one thing to jump back on your previous question on the courses that you do, mental health first aid. I know that I drum on and on about it. I've written an article for SMA about it as well. After the pandemic, that is going to be more important than anything else in the world. It doesn't matter if theatre or outside world. Mental health first aid. Everyone will not have health if you don't have mental health. We need to look after fellow stage managers. You need to look after your cast, and you can't look after everyone if you don't look after yourself first. And having that training gear you up to look after other people. That is going to be the most employable thing that you can learn during lockdown.
Thanks, Elaine. Thanks very much. Also, just a point to say, if there are people who are looking to go into MA courses and want advice, please feel free to drop into our SMA student and graduate drop-ins on Tuesdays and Fridays. Lots of us have gone to MAs or postgraduate schools, or we've done courses during lockdown, so we're all happy to chat about it and share advice and get from you. So come to those as well if you want to chat to us more about it, or you know, get anything. I'm just going to chime in quickly with a question that was sent to me. I'm just going to have one person answer if that's okay. The question is, at what stage in rehearsal process do you start plotting cues in the book? Helen, do you mind answering that question?
Okay, so what I will do is I will make a proposal where I think cues would be, for example, fly cues, you know, obvious scene changes where I think, well, there's going to be a pyro here and there's going to be a fly sequence here, etc. And sometimes it's very obvious where there's going to be lighting and sound cues because it'll be in the script. But I will pencil them in where, well, everything's penciled anyway. But you know, when I say pencil in that sense, it's a guesstimate of where I think they will be. And then I often, before we even move into anywhere close to getting close to tech, I'll receive a long list from the LX and sound designers of where the cues will be, where they think, and they will always say at the bottom, let's catch up, we'll have a meet, you know, because you know that's where you're really going to put them when you talk to them. Again, what they're telling you is just where they think they will go. So yeah, it's a process as you go. I never do it until maybe on a standard 4 or 5 week rehearsal period. That sounds luxurious. Who gets that anymore? But you know, maybe it's not until about week 3 or 4 will I even start thinking about cues. It's all about blocking. It's all creative for the first couple of weeks.
Great, thank you for answering that, Helen. I'll move on to Kat now for our next few questions.
Cool, thank you so much. That's been fascinating. So this is our show block. So we were wondering if you guys could tell us your top tips for show calling, which is the adrenaline. Archie.
Stay calm. If stuff goes wrong, accept it, deal with it, don't stress about it. I don't know, really. I should have prepared more for this question. Remember that your voice sometimes needs to often needs to rise above other people's, and don't be afraid to say, no, shut up, I'm talking, we need to deal with this. I think that's the main thing, is just stay calm, and you know, use your team as well. You know, if you've got someone on deck who can deal with something better than you can, leave it to them and get on with your job. And just remember that your job is to run the show. You know, it's not to deal with someone who needs a plaster or something like that. It's always your job to run the show and use everyone else for what they're there for. That's all I have, really.
Oh, no, that's a really good tip. Stay calm. Jane?
I would tag on a little bit to what Archie was saying about remembering that your voice is very often the one that needs to cut through everybody else's and rise above. But I would also say stay calm and be polite. Like, tech is hectic enough and emotions and stress are going everywhere without you adding to that. So I always have to write myself a post-it note and just put it like on my lamp that just says, be polite, be nice. Because occasionally it's really tempting to come through and just be like, guys, I need you to listen to me. But they all know they need to listen to you. It might be that there's just something going on that you're not aware of, or I don't know, someone's kicked a paint can over. That happened. So yeah, I would say be polite. And also, quite a lot in regional theatres, you can do this. If there's a particularly complicated sequence that I can always anticipate as being something that's going to stress me out, I stand up. If my monitors are positioned right, I do this at whole truck because I can, because of where the monitors are on my view to the stage. If a bit's complicated, I stand up. It really helps. It's like this hack for my brain that I suddenly feel much more confident and calm. So yeah, stand up if it's complicated.
Stand up. Noted. Duly noted. We do that quite a lot at BOFTers, actually. Elaine, would you like to?
So show calling for me, I know that my voice can be boring if you keep hearing it every day, day in and day out. So I try to sound interesting. Even if I think that it's the most boring show to call, I call it with a little bit of a giggle in my voice. Not saying that it's not clear, but that engage people, because your voice needs to be the one that get heard. I mean, all the serious point, like Jane and Archie have talked about it. So I'm just, picking up the little golden nuggets here to go, you need to make people engage, regardless of whether you're in rehearsal room or in a show. You need to be the person that people listen to. So just make sure that you are the one that is bouncing, When you call, the things need to be sharp. We all know that the geo can't be a lingering on. It needs to be a sharp, short things. But that should be the same with your numbers. You shouldn't be like LX 21, go. that is not going to help anybody. Like, you know, just get your rhythm in. You know, we're all musical if we're going to call a show. So just get your musicality in, have some fun with it, practice it before. If you know that you've got a difficult sequence to go, practice it. You know, learn how your rhythm, listen to, you know, in rehearsal, how people are speaking, go with their rhythm. That will help your operators as well, because they are subconsciously bouncing with you. Does that make sense? And in really complicated sequence, I think I might be the only DSM that does it, because I haven't met anyone yet. I wear high heels when I'm calling a show. If I am calling a really busy show that I know there's no chance of me having to walk on stage. Now, I can't walk in high heels for anything. Like, I'm a Bambi on ice if I'm on high heels, but that means that I'm not tapping my desk. If I'm tapping my desk, people are going to hear the click. Whereas if I'm tapping my toe on the floor, I'm the only one feeling the vibration. I'm the only one that can count those beats. That means that I'm not distracted with anything else. I got my constant pulse going. I know where my cue goes. Does that make sense? Strange, but it kind of is my way of doing it.
I love a nice pair of heels. I may take that on board. Helen?
I just love Elaine's story about high heels. I think that's amazing and hilarious, but I couldn't do that. I also want to compliment Jane on the whole I stand up thing. Jane, that's awesome, because that is exactly what I sometimes do. If I really need to focus, or if I am running on a good bit of nerves, I can't sit down. You know, sometimes on a big busy show, I won't sit down for maybe a couple of weeks into the show. When I can sit down, I go, all right, I've got this now. But what I took for notes about show calling is how I prepare. I go to the prompt desk at the quarter. I make sure that I am there, and I don't leave it unless I really have to. But I give myself 15 minutes to just have my time, a bit of peace, a bit of quiet, get comfortable in my seat. I don't think it's healthy to be dashing around the theatre, catching up with people. Sometimes you have to, I know, but when you can, I think it's good to just get to the prompt corner and give yourself several minutes to just have peace and quiet, chill out before the mayhem starts. So that's always what I do. I just get there, relax, you know, make sure I've got what I need, my water, my snacks, you know, just things that make me go, I'm ready.
That's a really good tip. I once shadowed a DSM who had everything set out on her desk nicely, ready for her. I guess in relation to this question, we were going to ask if you have any tips for learning to score read. Is there anyone in particular who's Elaine, would you like to?
I don't think I'm a good person for that, because I know how to score read since I was about 5, so I didn't really learn it. So sorry, someone else.
Oh, sorry, Elaine. Anybody? Jane? Jane?
I can score read, but I don't use it in work. I use, there's a name for it. It's completely gone. Counting bars and doing that. I don't actually read the music. Somebody help me out. What's that technique called? The Americans use it. It's basically dividing the music up into bars and using like upticks and significant features to track where you are in music rather than following the score. Andrew Reid does an online course on it, calling to music. So that's it. Yeah, I don't bother with score reading.
I don't know the name of the American version, I'm afraid. It's not my forte. It's definitely something I'll have to learn.
I do know, but it's in my head as what the Americans do, so take what you will.
What the Americans do, cool. Archie, do you?
Well, I was a super keen bean, so I used to practice at home all the time. So there's scores for basically every big show if you just search this song, and you can just sit there and tap along. You put your own cues in, whatever, and just learn and get a book. Like I've got a book somewhere called which is How to Read Music. So I learned the piano until I was 13, and then gave it up, and then sort of came back to it, which did help. But it's just practice, and that's what did it for me. And you know, work in opera as well, because then you get given a terrifying score, so you just have to learn. That really helps.
Cool. Yeah, we've had a few classes tapping along to music. Helen?
I can't score read. I wish I could. I can't play any musical instrument. I wish I was forced onto that at school, but you know, they put me on a recorder and that put me off everything. I think recorder was disgusting. You know, it was like put in a bucket of bleachy water and the teacher would go play it. You know, I was put off at the wrong age. So I wish I could score read. But yeah, I've worked on some of the big musicals. So I think there's two different things. There's looking at score and going, being able to hum it or see what it is, or listening to it and be able to count along and follow the up and down of the notes. You know, so I can follow music, but I can't read it. I've also done the Stage Management Association score reading course, which I recommend. I did that probably about 15 years ago. And what I learned from it is that there isn't really a way to do it. you just got to do it your own way. If a person like me is, you can't read music. So what I learned from that is that it is just about practice, counting bars, and obviously I learned a few about, you know, a few symbols and what that all means. Going back to what some of the other guys have said about opera, it's a completely different world. I've done one full-scale opera. I did that last year. It was a completely fascinating and interesting experience because it was like nothing I've ever done before. But about 15 years ago, I had an interview for Scottish Opera. I had no idea. I went to this interview so naively going, yeah, I think I've got an all right chance. They gave me a score reading test at an interview. Quite rare. I don't think many people do that anymore. But anyway, I failed the score reading test because I was just giggling all throughout it. I'd never seen anything like it. I had never heard anything like it. Which I do think is a little bit unfair. You know, who calls a show when they've not even seen the score or listened to it? You know, I just went into this room, this girl pressed play and they went, off you go. And I had no idea. So yeah, I recommend doing the Stage Management Association score reading test. And yeah, if you can't score read like me, doesn't mean you can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna try and do that course. We've had the amazing Lisa Hall, who Archie might remember at BOFTA's, taken us through score reading, but definitely more practice needed for me anyway. Cool. Next one's quite a big question. How do you decide whether to call a show stop or not? And how do you prepare for that moment? Jane, would you like to start?
They're tricky. No one ever wants to do them. I would say my decision on a show stop is, first off, if there's any physical danger to anybody on stage, call a show stop. Or if you get into such a tricky situation and such a tangle that the show absolutely cannot progress in any way, like no actor can get you out the hole, no suddenly starting the next scene with music, nothing can get you out the hole, everyone's just stuck, just do it. I've called a voice of God show stop twice on one show, because both times the theatre just went into sudden blackout. Didn't know what it was, didn't have time for the LX tech to figure out what it was, just there and then suddenly plunged into unexpected blackout. Voice of God show stop right there, just to say to everyone, we've got this. I always, even if it's in the abstract, always make time to just have a conversation with the CSM and say, what if we have to stop? What do I need to do? If you call a show stop, what do I need to do? If I need to call a show stop, what do I say? I always make time for it. It's always there on my lists, just because you never know what's going to be thrown at you. Same with fire evacuation, particularly if you're touring, always ask about what the fire evacuation procedure is, because you never know.
Be prepared. That's the Scout motto, isn't it? Elaine?
It depends on the scale of your show. A lot of big shows, you as a DSM, you probably the second person to know that you're stopping, because your stage manager would have made that call, because they are the eyes on the stage and they would see the danger probably before you, because you're cueing a musical number. So like Jane said, just make sure that you had the conversation about how a show stop needs to run before you go into performance mode. And I can tell you from experience, the one time that we thought that we will have that conversation after the second preview, was when I opened Strictly Ballroom at Piccadilly Theatre, and we flooded the stage on the very first preview, and I had to do this show stop. Never had a conversation yet at that point, so make sure you do it before you go into performance. Always have the stop sheet next to you so that you know what you're saying. Those times are when your heart is pumping so fast that you can't make it up at that point. Regardless of what it is, I just blame it on technical difficulty most of the time, because 9 times out of 10 it is, or medical emergency if, you know, audience can clearly see one of your cast have fainted on stage. A lot of the time that showstop are very clear. I think we shouldn't be too scared of them. I've done way too many showstop to be scared of them now. Reason for showstop, if it's something that is definitely needing a showstop, you would know it, because there's no two ways about it, like when automation fails and stuff like that. And as a DSM, just always make sure that you can hear other department if they shout stop on your comms, because, you know, in musical especially, if the sound op comes on and shouts stop, they are then chucking their cans off again to try to fix the problem or pull the band out. So you just need to make sure that even if you are really busy queuing, listen out for if anyone shouts stop in your ear. And have the sheet written out that you need to stop. Have a conversation with your sound op how to do the stop, and knowing where your got mic is. Half of the time, people don't actually care what you say when you stop the show as an audience member. So don't beat yourself up if you do it wrong. That's the other thing. The amount of time that I muddled up my words because it was such a rush of situation, and actually I was in danger at the prompt corner. So what comes out of my mouth might not be, you know, producer perfect 10. Audience didn't care. And half of the time, audience love the show stop. Just live performance. So, you know, don't be scared to do them.
Cool. We had one in Manchester once, and the DSM just said, "I'm afraid the show's stopping for a moment," or something like that, and the curtain came down. Oh boy. Helen?
Yeah, a bit like what the rest of the guys have said. Like, I've done so many show stops now that I'm quite cool with them. But when I was younger, when I was a book cover, they would utterly terrify me. You know, it's so nerve-wracking because, again, if you're the book cover on a big show, you are the junior, and you feel that you've been thrown into something that you've not got maybe that experience of doing yet. I remember one of the first show stops I did on Chitty, I made a God mic announcement to the audience, and I could hear my voice breaking with fear back, you know, booming. And I just felt it was, because everyone on stage were panicking. You know, we didn't need to panic, but that's what, you know, everyone just went, oh my God, we're stopping, because it was a panic point in the show anyway. You know, it was all a dramatic panic, and then there was a real life panic, and it hadn't happened yet at that point in the show. It became throughout this 15-month tour that we would often stop at that show at that point anyway. So we all kind of got used to it after a while. A bit like what Elaine said, I've got an announcement sheet with several different variable things that I might stop for. I will look over that before most shows until, you know, I'm not so stressed about the show stops anymore. So when a show is new, it's likely that you do have that fear of stopping more. So I'll look at that over a few times. It's great when you have the advance warning that you're going to stop at the end of a number, at the end of a scene. You can say to all the operators, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to stop at this scene. I'm going to call these flies in. You bring the house lights up to half, things like that. Sometimes it's an emergency situation. It might be a bit eggy. You just have to roll with it. A bit like what Jane said, you know, if someone's in physical danger, stop the show. Don't wait for, you know, a good moment, you know, or what might look good, which I've seen happen before. Though I remember on a production of West Side Story that I wasn't working on, I was, you know, working front of house. There was an audience member taken seriously ill, and we were saying, you need to stop the show, and they wouldn't. They were waiting to the end of a number, and we're like, stop the show, you know, which was really bad. You just have to stop sometimes. What I will do as a DSM, when we have stopped, whatever the incident is, everyone on stage will be dealing with the incident. What you have to do as DSM is talk to everyone else who is not involved with what's going on stage. Maybe the MD's on the phone going, well, what's going on? You know, front of house, you might be in touch with them more. There might be duty management of the theatre that have come to the stage going, what's going on? The stage manager might be busy dealing with God knows what. So that might be a responsibility as well, to just keep everyone in touch of what's going on and have a plan of action of how you're going to start. Are you going to have another announcement saying we're starting, you know, and talk to other operators and say, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to call this, we're going to take the flies out, and then we're going to continue from this point. So it's just constant communication is what you have to do. It's not nice doing show stops. Even I still get the fear of them, but not as bad as when I was younger.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think we're getting the message that we need to be prepared and have the right paperwork, etc., and communicate. Archie, do you want to add anything to that, please?
I think they've basically covered everything. Start a timer as well. So the second you stop as well, just so you know where you are, watch it and just think, okay, it's been 5 minutes. I'm going to do another announcement to the audience just so they know what's going on and they know we haven't forgotten about them. It's, yeah, having a piece of paper. I always have my show stop sheet sticking out the side of my book so that if I need to pull it out, it's laminated. It's really easy to get to. And just, yeah, just so you know what you're doing. Generally, whenever I have to do an announcement, I try to, I think it was either Elaine or Helen said, just to stop that sort of voice breaking, just like take a breath and then do your voice of God announcement so you come across this lovely calm person, even as everything is kind of falling down around you. And it's just having those conversations in advance. So the stage manager, the MD, the sound number one, so everyone knows how you're going to make it work. You know, so I've had 4 or 5 fire alarms, which meant we had to stop. Like we had a fire alarm at Magic Mike, and taking the cast and the audience to the same place in Magic Mike when you're having a fire alarm is not a fun experience. But just learning your venue, learning your team, and just being prepared so that even if it's a massive surprise, you can still think, okay, I've got this, I've got my procedure, I'm just going to do it, get it out of the way. And just, yeah, not being afraid to stop as well is really key. Just knowing that, because shows stop, it happens. Like it's been said before, the audiences love it. Like especially if they've seen why you're stopping, they get so behind you the second you start again. So on Joseph, we had someone fall off the set of a show stop. Got him together. That was about a 10-minute show stop because we had to get someone to just check him out, make sure he was okay, send him to hospital. But then as soon as we got started again, the energy for the rest of that performance was phenomenal because everyone knew exactly what was going on. So just remember that during the show, you and the audience are kind of this massive team and everyone wants it to go well. So even if you have to stop, it's really not the end of the world. And you've got to do what's safe at the end of the day. Everything has to be safe.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, I suspect it must be nerve-wracking doing your first ever show stop. Cool. So the last question from this section is, has a location or a particular genre changed the way you work as a DSM? Jane, would you like to comment?
I've only done a couple of site-specific jobs, most notably a 6-month job at Hampton Court, which was quite interesting. There was a bunch of us running around the backstage of the Hampton Court Palace, which was a bit different because during rehearsals, I was very much in the traditional DSM role, blocking rehearsal notes, talking to creatives, but a huge part of that job for me, because we were physically moving through to different locations, was the Excel spreadsheet of dreams as to everybody's individual track through the palace, and also lots of other things to take on board that normally you don't think about, audience interaction, audience movement, all of that. Just the number of things I had to take into consideration that would directly impact the actors and the performance grew. And then once we got into the palace and the show started, stage management ceased to become traditional stage management and we took on more of a front of house role. But that's really the only experience I've had with site specific. I would just simply say you need to widen your idea of what your responsibilities are and what you need to take into account.
Cool, thank you, Jane. We are running close to time. This has been such a good session. So I'll just ask Elaine if you could comment on that if possible, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to move on to the next section.
Genre-wise, I think for me would be when I did events. So we talked a lot about theatre, but being on event site is a very different world, and it certainly affects how I become a different kind of DSM. So I worked on event a lot of the times as a screen caller. So it's more like cameras and stuff like that on, for example, the Liberty Festival and Paralympics and stuff like that. So it's being more adaptable. I think that's the thing that I learned from the event world. Be it opera, be it ballet, be it anything like that, it's still kind of within our safe bubble of stage management in the theatre. Even if site specific, you kind of know where your remit is, but in event anything can happen, and things escalate very, very quickly in event. Everything that we have for weeks, rehearsal and performance wise, can happen over 30 minutes, from changing performers to the sky absolutely opening and tipping it down when you've got camera trucks everywhere and stuff like that. So it's learning about that adaptability that changed the way that I DSM.
Cool, brilliant. I think that's a key skill to have in stage management, adaptability. Cool. Nathalie, over to you.
Thanks very much, Kat. I'm just gonna, there's been a question from the floor that I think Archie will be well posed to answer. It's about ballet and dance. So someone's asked, when calling dance pieces, are all cues from the score, or can they be from movement too?
So I might be the wrong person to answer this, because when I did ballet, I was an ASM, and when we did Magic Mike, there was no score, because it was like it was all remixes and tracks, so a lot of it was time code or visual. So I may not be best placed. Elaine may be better placed to answer that, but time code is super fun as well. That adds a whole new dimension into the whole thing.
Elaine, what do you do with your ballet?
Yeah, so opera is definitely from a score, but it also depends on your creators, because some creators don't read scores like you might do. You know, working in ballet and opera, most DSM read score, but a lot of the creators don't. Ballet, a lot of the time, they will say that it's when they go into such a pattern. So as a DSM, if you read score, you need to know where to pick that bar number and put it in for yourself. I would say in ballet and opera, the ASM book cover is very different. You don't normally get an ASM book cover to call the actual show, because ASM runs their wings in with their scores as well. There's not so much cover in the opera world in terms of book. You might have 2 DSMs, but I would in general say ballet and opera do it to scores, because that's the easiest way to hand over to someone if you do get hit by the stage management bus, because there will be someone in the house that would know how to score read and get you out of a show situation. Movement is only when you're communicating with creatives, not when you're into shows, not in ballet and opera. Thank
you, Elaine. Thanks for that. That's really useful. And yeah, Archie, great mentioning about the time code. If we had another hour, we could just talk about time code all day. It's a whole other topic. So I'm going to move on to the very final section of today. So the first question I wanted to ask, also because I've also done the mental health first aid course, and mental health is something I really care about. With this job, there's so much stress and responsibility. How do you manage your mental health in this role on a daily basis? I think I'll start with Elaine.
I would happily admit, and I have admitted to so many SMA brunch publication as well. I didn't do very well when I first started, and even to quite close to now, I didn't do very well up until 2018. I actually let this job took over my life. And I openly said that I burnt out in 2017 during the wedding singer, Archie, funny enough. So I think it's very important that we look after ourselves. Things that I've learned through the Mental Health First Aid England and through talking to other people, it's self-care. You can do so many things that you can care for yourself. They don't need to be expensive. One of the golden thing that I've learned is have a happy hour, whether it's being once a day, because at the moment in lockdown we've got nothing to do, so let's do one a day happiness hour, or if you're really busy, 1 hour in the whole week. Just pull that hour out for yourself. Do whatever that you can switch your brain off, that you don't need to be thinking about work, or anything, remember your to-do list is going to be there. That, you know, you can work all your hours in the world and achieve 90%, or take an hour out and achieve 85. But when you can achieve that 85% in a much happier brain mentality, that 85% is going to go so much further than your 90% when you hate your life. So I would say that look after yourself, look after each other, talk to each other. Talking is something that is really difficult, and I struggled with it so much, because in stage management, you're trained to be thick-skinned, you're the one leading, you need to have that ironclad, nothing break me. But admitting that you are a human being and actually there are things that you can't do is the biggest relief you can have. And you'll be so surprised how many people would be there to pick you up. So don't be afraid to say that I'm struggling, especially when you're first graduating. There are some of us that have been around the block for a little bit that will be happy to pick you up. We don't need to know you. Just reach out to people. We don't bite. Well, not most of the time.
Amazing, Elaine. Thank you so much. That is such fantastic advice. And yeah, it's amazing how we can often forget things like happy hours or taking time for ourselves, but it makes such a difference. Helen, I was seeing you nodding a lot throughout that. What do you think?
Yeah, everything that Elaine said, I'm happy to admit that I've suffered from mental health issues. Part of that is just the person I am. You know, a little bit of a hyperactive person, but that when you're a person that's high is also going to have a down. But I also think it's career related too. I've worked in theatre all my life, and that has been an insecure business. It means I've been very unsettled in my personal and social life. I toured for about 12 years, which is great fun, but massively exhausting. You know, and what we do as stage managers is stressful by nature, because often a schedule is against us, or a budget is against us, or adrenaline, which we've mentioned before. That's a good and a bad thing. So that can have effects on our mental health. I think you learn by your experiences. When I was younger, you know, I did the whole thing where you just, you know, have less care for yourself. Care for yourself is important. But when I was younger and on the road, did all the things that you do. You go out and you just get wasted after a show. That's your culture, you know. That I just can't do all that anymore, you know. And the people, some people in my teams, you know, still go out and they can party all night and then feel fine the next day. I can't do that. So you need to know your limits. So I just know where I just like to just, you know, I know that I need a clear and a rested head. I need to be well fed and watered. All these things are little things that are self-care, little elements that we can look after ourselves with. And just to kind of pick up on what Elaine said, it's okay to not be okay. And the more you talk about it, you'll realise that it's very common. It's okay to put your hand up and go, I'm finding this tough at the moment. And most of the time it's not you. You'll think it's you, you know, that's the weak person. No, it's just the situation. But yeah, you know, I just think it's really important. It's great that we all talk about this, and we're talking about it more and more. It's really important, you know, because, you know, it's a big deal, mental health issues.
Thank you so much, Helen. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and I totally agree. It's great that we're starting to open up more about this, and hopefully that continues when we get out of this pandemic. Jane, do you have anything to add on that?
Only that for me, one of the hardest things that I had to learn how to deal with, alongside what Helen and Elaine have already said, was being okay with making mistakes. Because as the DSM, you are looked to as being the calm, the organised person who is going to get it right and has all the answers. And I used to really beat myself up when I made mistakes. Like when we'd be in tech and I wouldn't call a sequence perfectly, I'd really feel it. Or we'd be in preview and the director would turn to me and be like, what was with that lighting cue? And the overwhelming feeling of not being good enough, I really struggled with. And I really found it hard to walk out of that building at the end of every day and leave it behind. So I've had to work really hard on acknowledging within myself that I made a mistake, and that's okay. A lovely phrase that a CSM taught me was coulda, woulda, shoulda, didn't. And you just walk away from it and accept that it's done, and there's no point worrying about it because you can't undo it. If it was a big thing, apologise, but then walk away from it and leave it behind you. And however you find that you can do that, I would say learning to live with, but also let go of any mistakes is really important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jane. I think it's really great for, like, I'm sure us as students and graduates, we've all had a time where we thought we're not good enough or that we're struggling and we don't feel like we're up to the job. So it's really good to know that, you know, we can make mistakes and it's okay to walk away and to just, you know, say tomorrow will go better and we'll try again. Archie, do you have any final words on that?
Not really. It does just come down to accepting that nobody's perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. I mean, so what have I done? So when the pandemic hit, that was really tough. I had a horrendous few weeks when the pandemic first hit, and it just felt like my entire world had collapsed, which it did. I mean, I was doing a show on a Friday, I was unemployed on a Saturday. You know, when I was at drama school, in a tech session for a drama school show, I was in tears in the auditorium because things weren't quite right. You know, and it's just, it is accepting in yourself that, like Jane said, you're going to make mistakes. That's perfectly normal. Everyone makes mistakes. I made a mistake in the first preview, the first big musical I opened, which slightly ruined the timeline of the whole show. It was the first preview. We teched up till 15 minutes before the curtain went up. Like, stuff is going to fall through the cracks in those early stages and later on. You know, when you get too comfortable with a show, the exact same thing can happen. And it's relying on the people around you. The one thing about theatre that I found is so different to anything else I've done is that you form these really, really intense relationships with the people you work with. And that is the most valuable support network that you have. Like, I remember being sat in a car park in Oxford, having found out our show was being cancelled with my colleague. And we just sat and chatted for 2 hours and just talked about, it wasn't really about work, it was about life, the universe and everything. And it was just, it's recognizing that you have this phenomenal support network around you because you, especially when you're touring, you live together, you work together, you socialize together. So you have, and everyone has their problems. Like, I don't know, people might be, but I've certainly not come across many people who are living their perfect, happy life. So there's always someone you can turn to, whether it's your company manager or whether it's your colleague or whether it's a friend who you just want to reach out to. So it's accepting your limit and just sticking your hand up and saying, I'm not okay, I need a second. And just embracing that and not letting it, because if things build up, if you let things build up, that's when you have a problem. And that's another thing that I think has been really valuable, that I've taken, that I learned in those first few months and years, is just, it's okay, just say it, get it out the way, don't procrastinate about things, and then you can move on, you know, and just don't get too stuck in your head. We all do it, I still do it, but just try not to. And find that activity that you can do just to yourself, like Elaine's happy hour, like I go running, like go for a run, go for a walk, get out, get away from the environment, get away from the theatre, get away from the job, because it's such an all-encompassing thing. And just give yourself that space to just be yourself and just get away. So like Sunderland is great for that, because if you ever tour to Sunderland, you've got Roker Beach just down the way. You can go and stand on this massive beach, there's no one else there, and just lose yourself for a second. And that's probably the best form of sort of self-care I ever found when I was touring.
Great, thanks, Archie. So I want to ask next, because we're all graduates and students, we're all quite, I think most of us are anxious about applying and finding jobs. So I wanted to ask you all, what are your tips for cover letters, CVs, interviews, not just for DSM jobs, but also for ASM book cover jobs? Helen, you go first.
Okay, so yeah, I've got lots to say on this. I think CVs and cover letters, I've sent a lot, and I've also received a lot. Because sometimes I've been recruiting for some people. So I think something that I've learned from a cover letter is what you should do is keep it short and simple, and not write a long letter full of irrelevancies that is just going to make the person bored reading. You have to remember, for many jobs, there are so many applicants, and you have to make your point clear and to the point. So I would say you've got to keep your cover letter simple, with, you know, and word it with a bit of formality, but word it how you would speak to someone anyway. You know, I remember receiving a few cover letters that was written as if it was someone talking from the Victorian age. You know, I just thought it was a little bit strange. CVs, I think it's important to just have, you know, a straightforward, simple font, don't clutter it, don't have any fancy borders or pictures of theatrical signs. It just makes people just go, oh, next. You know, I've seen that happen. I've seen some people look at CVs and not even read it. They just don't like the look of it. And that's brutal. But that is what the industry's like when you get so many CVs and you just not get time to just deal with any things that you just get on your nerves. I think working in stage management, everyone knows what a stage manager, an ASM and a DSM is. So just write down on your CV what job you've done, what your job title role was, and the dates. You don't need to write what your duties were and things like that. I've seen that a few times. It's just padding, gets in the way. You don't need to do that. And yeah, I just think don't ever be too gushy. You know, it's kind of going back to what I said at the start. Don't write in a cover letter, this would be my dream and things like that. I've seen that happen. It's a bit strange.
Great, thanks, Helen. Archie, what are your thoughts?
So I'm going to come at this obviously as an applicant rather than someone recruiting. I mean, Helen's basically covered most of it, but just keeping it simple. And also, every now and again, you might need to cherry pick as well. Just find a way of just making sure that the stuff that you really want to talk about is right at the top. So whether that's in your cover letter, whether it's on your CV, whether you chuck a section at the top saying, I'm bloody great at propping and sewing and all this stuff, put the things that you think they want to see right in front of them. Because I've recruited not in theatre but in other stuff, and as Helen said, it is literally just no, yes, no, yeah, no. So you want them to, the first thing that they see is exactly what you think they want. So that your CV is one of those that goes in the S pile, and then they look at it in more detail and see how great you are.
Awesome, thank you very much. Elaine, what are your top tips regarding applications?
Like everyone said, short and sweet. Cover letter, don't tell me that you're enthusiastic and all of those things, because unless you're enthusiastic, you're not going to be in this industry. So don't bore me with things that I don't need to know. Actually tells me things that I want to know. So for example, if you're applying to Matilda, the musical, if you have got a chaperone license, write in your cover letter so that we know that you work with children and you know how to handle children. Or if you're applying for an opera job, say to me that you are a singer or you have done your score reading course. Those are more important than me knowing that you can make a good cup of tea or you're good at prop making, because I don't care about those things at that point. Do your research. Like, research is such an important thing that I always say to people. If you're going to apply to jobs, don't just send a standard print 2,000 copies of your CV and 2,000 copy of your cover letter and send it out. Know what you're applying for. So if you're applying for a DSM job, if you've got DSM experience, put them to the top of your CV. So for my CV, I don't have dates on mine. I do in category, which I know that is different to a lot of people, how they do it. But if I'm applying for a company manager job, I have more of my company managing things at the top rather than my ASM in a very big venue that I might still keep in my CV. Keep your CV to a page. In your skills and hobby session, don't tell me things that I really don't care about. So you collecting stamps, good for you and great, that is your happiness hour. I don't need to know that unless what you're doing, the play is a passage to India or something that is actually relevant, that I would need specialists in prop that can do era of stamps. Those things, you need to know what you write in is going to interest the person that look at it. We get 3 seconds in a CV. When I work for a big company, we get about 5,000 CV for 2 jobs. I don't look at it more than 3 seconds. If in your cover letter, it doesn't tell me what I need to know, I don't even look at your CV. I'm sorry, that's gone in the bin. If you have worked with the director, if you have worked with the creatives on the show, put it on the cover letter. If you have worked with them in drama schools, that's useful to know, because then I can call them rather than your reference, because of course your reference is going to give you a good reference. I'm going to call people that you work with that is going to be on the show. Long-winded, but there you are.
Long-winded, but very good. Perfect. And finally, Jane.
I don't really have anything to add, because I actually have to admit I have not needed to apply for a job for about 5 years now. I've got everything through word of mouth, so I can't remember the last time I had to write a CV or a cover letter. I'm so sorry. The only thing I would definitely say, dredging up past experiences, is to echo what everyone said about being specific. Anyone can say that stage managers are organised, but actually, what does that mean? Everyone can say, oh, they're really good at communication, but actually, for a DSM, what does that properly entail? Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. Thank you everyone so much for all your great advice. It's very useful for me, and I'm sure it is for everyone else. So not to, obviously we've just arrived at 8 o'clock, but we have one more question that I'd like to do quick rapid fire. So really just give me like a few words first you can think of. What is your favorite part about the job? Archie, go first.
Calling shows. It's the best. It's amazing. Fucking love it. Sorry.
Elaine.
Stationery collection.
Yes. Stationery. Helen.
Just being in a theatre. I feel at home when I'm in a theatre. I love them.
And finally, Jane, what's your favourite part?
I'm never bored. It's not boring.
Yeah, not like nowadays. Nowadays we're a lot more bored. Cool. Well, I think that's all we've got time for in terms of questions. Kat just wanted to say something briefly before I go on to all the reminders and shout outs.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Natalie. It was just we'd had a question on the chat about mental health, so thank you all for covering that so thoroughly. And as everybody knows, there's quite a lot of suggestions on the chat for mental health links. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kat. I'm sorry we haven't been able to get through all the questions either in person or in advance, but as always, if you do have any questions for stage management professionals and these lovely people, go to the Friends of the SMA group, and there, if you ask questions, people will reply super promptly. You'll get loads of response and loads of interesting discussion, so don't hesitate to go on there.